Okay, so now I will start my paper reading. But before that, I would like to thank Dr. Moise for having given me this opportunity to be able to participate in this seminar. And now I will start reading my paper. The title of my paper is Challenge and Change in Translating Philosophical Texts. Translations can be divided into two major classes. The first is the translation of works which are of the type of belles lettres. Thus, one can translate a drama, novel, poem, short story, epic, etc. from one language into another language. Such translations form the first type. In the second type, we can include translations of scientific works, philosophical texts, research papers, research monographs, encyclopedic works, etc. In both these, there are further two classes. One is of ancient works and the other one is that of modern works. In the ancient works, one has to face the problem of interpretation. Due to the antiquity of such works, there will be some changes in the vocabulary, syntax, etc. There may be archaisms, elliptic constructions, etc., due to which the text may be very difficult to understand. It may give a lot of scope for different interpretations. Comparatively, these types of problems are to be faced less in the modern works. In all types of works of the modern of the nature of belles lettres, we have to face the problem of translation of idioms and proverbs which are deeply rooted in the cultural background of every language. Comparatively, these problems are less in the scientific works. Similarly, to translate a work from one particular European language into another European language is easier than translating a work from an ancient or modern Indian language into a European language. Thus, everywhere in the work of translation, we have to cross over the cultural gap between the two languages. In this context, it is worth remembering that the translation is an art as well as science. To a certain extent, it is also a new creation, as it were. It is very difficult to produce a good and authentic translation. In this context, it is worth recalling the famous and realistic French sentence. Thus we read, Les traductions sont comme les femmes. Lorsqu'elles sont belles, elles ne sont pas fidèles. Lorsqu'elles sont fidèles, elles ne sont pas belles. This sentence has been written by a Moroccan author, namely Tahir Ben Jelou. The author was writing in French. It is also very difficult to translate this sentence into English. For the word traduction is feminine in French, but the word translation for which it is used in French, it is in neuter gender in English. So the real significance of the sentence cannot be brought into English. It can be roughly translated into English as follows. The translations are like women. They are, when they are beautiful, they are not faithful. When they are beautiful, they are not faithful. And when they are faithful, they are not beautiful. The question of gender makes the translation lose the original beauty and the fun in English translation. There are many gender differences in different languages. Thus, the word moon is feminine in English. It is masculine in German. The word sun or Sonne is feminine in German, but the word sun in Sanskrit, Surya, is masculine. Thus, in connection with gender, a translator has to face numerous problems. There are many other problems in translating some text from one language into another language because of cultural differences in connection with history, geography, flora, fauna, food habits, etc. Thus, every country has its own history. People of that country are aware of that history. The allusions to the history in that country may not be understandable to the readers of the translated books from that country. Similarly, geographical details, including meteorological peculiarities such as snowfall, heavy rain, or absence of rain, water shortage, mountains, deserts, big and small rivers, oceans being near or far away, create a lot of difference in language, garments, food habits, etc. of people staying in a particular region. The entire Weltanschauung of some people may be different from the one of, to the other. It will be difficult for a person in India to understand the word Silesia, which will not be found in any geographical atlas. Similarly, it will be difficult to understand the Marathi word Mandesh for a European reader. For this word also will not be found in any atlas. The references to these regions will, however, be found in literature written in German or in Marathi. While translating such words, therefore, detailed footnotes are essential, whether the book being translated is a novel or a scientific book. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to understand the translated book. The same is the case of many crops and trees. In India, trees like mango, banyan, neem, people are very common. For a European reader, it will be difficult to understand these trees. Similarly, animals like tigers, lions, camels, etc. are famous in India, but they may not be well known to a European reader. Kangaroo is a very common animal in Australia, but not very common to an Indian reader. We have to give pictures of these animals. Then only we can understand them. Similarly, many Indian food items like upama, idli, vada, amti, etc. are not known in Europe or in other countries in like in Africa, America, etc. We have to give detailed descriptions of these things accompanied with pictures. The real knowledge of these things will be after tasting these things only. This is very difficult or impossible. Of course, some footnotes are essential. While translating philosophical texts in Sanskrit into any language in Europe, we have to face all the above mentioned problems in addition to the difficult subject matter. Let us discuss some of these problems and try to suggest the ways of solving these problems. In this respect, I suggest that the philosophical text in Sanskrit will have to be translated in two levels. The first level will be a philological translation. The second level is philosophical translation consisting of explanations, consisting of explanatory notes. By the word philological, I mean two things. The first concerns the textual criticism. It is possible that the manuscripts of philosophical texts may contain variant readings and even corruptions due to the handwriting or negligence of the copywriter. We have at first to edit the text in accordance with the principles of textual criticism. In the case of Jayanta Bhatta's Nyaya Manjari, there are many problems in deciding the exact text. Similarly, in Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutra with the Chandrananda's Vritti, there were numerous textual problems. This text has been critically edited and published in the Gaikwad Oriental series, Baroda. The second part of the philological translation consists of literal, faithful translation into a modern language like English. This has been done by Moise and by me jointly. In this translation, there is not only translation of the text, but also a detailed discussion of all the points in the text. In addition to this, an exhaustive introduction dealing with the date of the scholar, of the commentator, importance of the work in the history of Indian philosophy in general, and the history of Nyaya Vaisheshika philosophy in particular has been added. While translating a philosophical text in Sanskrit into any Indian language like Hindi or Marathi, the translators keep the original words in Sanskrit as they are in Hindi or in Marathi and, and add only Hindi or Marathi suffixes to them. These so-called translations are, really speaking, no translations at all. These they leave a student where he was before reading these translations. They do not explain the technical terms in Sanskrit, so they are really speaking no translations at all. Thus, they are practically useless to the students of Sanskrit. Actually, many Sanskrit works have been translated in Hindi in this way, but all these publications are in vain. The same is the case of Marathi translations in the field of Vedanta carried out by V.V. Bapat and D.V. Zog. Thus, there are translations of Sanskrit works like Panchadashi, commentaries of Shankaracharya on Upanishads, on Brahma Sutras, etc. These translations are pseudo translations useless for any type of reader. On the other hand, there are some extremely useful translations and they can be regarded as the best examples of translations of philosophical texts. They are very much useful to all types of readers. Thus, for example, there is a translation of a Mimamsa text called Artha Sangraha by A.B. Gajendra Gadkar and R.D. Karmarkar. Both these scholars were basically very good teachers. They know how to make a reader understand a subject in an effective manner. Thus, for example, they have translated the word bhavana as creative energy and explained the concept in their notes in a very lucid manner. The same is the case of many other technical terms in this text. The main point to be noted in this connection is that the faithful translation accompanied by detailed notes makes a translation perfect and useful. In their notes, there are adequate references to other texts, quotations, definitions, discussions of all the philosophical terms, and this makes their translations very useful. All these remarks are equally applicable to another philosophical text, namely Tarka Sangraha. This work belongs to two other scholars, namely Atle and Bodas. This book makes an excellent introduction to Nyaya Vaisheshika system of Indian philosophy. Every translator of any philosophical text in Sanskrit into any modern language should follow the model of these two translations. There are a few other ideal works in the field of Sanskrit text written in English. Thus, for example, there is a work of Yaska, namely Nirukta, which deals with the science of etymology. V.K. Rajwade has edited the text with detailed notes. The work does not contain translation of the text as such, but the explanatory notes are so copious and detailed ones that each point is made clear in them in a very critical manner. Similar is the case of Brahma Sutra with Shankaracharya's commentary on some parts of the second chapter. Here, there is a discussion on several schools of Indian philosophy and their refutation by the Advaita Vedanta school. Thus, for example, there is a discussion on Sankhya, Nyaya Vaisheshika, Buddhism, Jainism, Pashupata, Pancharatra, etc. This part has been dealt with by S.K. Belwalkar. There is no literal translation of the text here, but the detailed notes indirectly carry out the work of translation. These notes make us understand the meaning of the text. Moreover, they increase the general knowledge of the reader. For many students and teachers, this book has been very useful for many years. In short, by way of conclusion, let me state that in the translations of philological texts, literal translation of the text is very important. But more than it is very much necessary that there should be exhaustive, detailed notes which are rich in cross references and explanations, which are very important. They are really very essential part of such work. I insist that critical explanatory notes are necessary in translations of belles lettres as well as scientific texts. Otherwise, the translations will remain incomplete. A detailed introduction dealing with the original text is also useful. Of course, various types of indices and bibliography will increase the importance of the work. Thus, translation is not a mechanical work, but rather a productive and difficult job, as difficult as producing a new work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Thite, for a wonderfully well-timed session, and also delightful in many of its parts and instructive in others. And I can see your scholastic approach very much at work in your thinking. I'm waiting for questions, and Professor Vinel, who translated from Greek philosophy and theology, Hellenistic literature, has a question. She's an expert in translations.
I'm sorry, I have no question.
Yes, please.
I have no question. It was a mistake from me.
That's fine.
Dr. Moise, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I had the feeling that good. You are Gavin Flood.
Thank you, Professor Thite, for a wonderful lecture. I enjoyed that very much. Now, let me ask you a question about the beginning of your lecture. Translation is difficult. I mean, that was one of your points, but it's not impossible. And I'm thinking that because we share a world, there are certain limits or certain constraints at work on the possibilities of translation. And so it's just, do you think that there are some instances where translation is impossible? I was thinking, even if it's a word, you could translate it into another language by a phrase or something like that. I'd be interested in what you think.
Yes, 100% translation is impossible. I agree with you. But still, we have to make some efforts in order to understand the difficulties of a reader. And even a bad translation is also sometimes very useful than no translation at all. So in this context, I remember the famous sentence, dictionaries are like watches. The worst of them is better than none. Similarly, translations are also like watches. Even the worst of them is better than none. So translations are useful, particularly for not only for a student, but all the readers. They are very useful because no one can read all the languages, no one can know all the languages, but still one has some curiosity to know what has been written in some other language, particularly those texts which have been written in archaic languages like Sanskrit, Greek, etc. It is very necessary that there should be translations, there should be some interpretations and so on. So translation is a very useful activity, but still one has to face some problems, and with the help of footnotes, one can overcome these problems. That is my main argument.